I just want to tell you a little bit about Shawn Bryant. Some of you know him. He's been a familiar trainer with us before, just a delight. I consider him a friend and a colleague, and he was actually a former Head Start teacher and a mental health consultant, and he's the founding director of the Teaching Excellence Center. He has over 27 years of educational experience in urban, suburban, and rural school districts and early learning settings. Much of Shawn's work supports teachers, programs, and leaders in planning, visioning, implementing, and evaluating large-scale improvement initiatives. He's a national speaker, I think international. I need to update that, right, Shawn? Anyway, he's a national, international speaker, a trainer, and consultant. And you can learn more about Shawn and his work by visiting teachingexcellence.com. Thank you again so much, Shawn, for being here. And I will be helping with the chats as they come in, as people have to say, and letting you know if there's some email or some conversation, some chat that comes in that might be helpful for everybody to talk about. So thank you. Take it away, Shawn.
Thank you, Beth. Thank you, Leah. As always, welcome to Learning with Training at First 5 Alameda County. There's so much that goes on behind the scenes that Beth and Leah supports all of us with, including myself. So I'm always grateful and thankful for both of them. All right, here we go. It took a minute for the slide to move. So today's topic is overindulgence and affluence, the danger of too much and never enough in early childhood. So I want to say welcome and good morning to everyone. And thank you all for spending, again, some time with us today. I value your time and attention because there are so many things that I know many of you could be doing for work, for your family, or for yourself. So thank you for taking some time to fit in some professional development. I want you all to get comfortable in this short time that we're going to be together. Get yourself some water, some tea if you haven't. If you're seated, make sure you're comfortable so that you can learn best. Hopefully you've all received the link in an email from Leah with a copy of all the handouts, including a PDF of the slide deck that we're going through today. If you haven't, check that and you will have all the things that will be referenced in today's session. One thing I want to ask everybody is to check your chat pane, and in the chat pane to make sure that it says all panelists and attendees, because some folk only have it checked at all panelists, which is the default. So if you type something, only Leah, Beth, and myself, or really Leah and Beth, because I'm not looking at that screen too much, will see it. But if you put all attendees, then everyone sees what you type. So I really want you to make sure that you all have this learning experience, because in the past, people were typing and were wondering why other people weren't responding. It's because, excuse me, if you don't change that, then we all don't see it. So please make sure you have that in place. To maximize your learning experience, I highly recommend that you do full screen, and you'll get the best from the slide deck today during this Zoom session. So I'm Shawn Bryant. For those who don't know, I'm going to be your facilitator today. I was looking in the chat room at the sign-in, so I see a lot of familiar faces. I don't want to call out names because then if I forget someone, I'll get a text or an email. But thank you all for showing up today and participating in this learning journey with us. I'm going to be a learning guide today, and you can find out more about me in that handouts folder because my bio is included there. But quickly, as a professional development consultant, I work with programs, schools, districts, agencies, administratively, regionally, and at the classroom level, for helping and supporting with various levels of what we call quality. As a coach, which is probably my favorite type of professional development to offer, I'm in contact with teachers, children, and families, and I consider that a privilege that they allow me to observe and learn with them. So what I want us to start today before we move forward, because you've heard a little bit about me, in that chat box, which is why I preface to check all panelists and attendees, we're just going to take 1 minute. For everyone who's logged in today, if you could just type in that chat box, your name, your agency, and your role, so that we can all share in who's here today. Good morning, Ariel. I see you just say good morning. Good morning, Denise. Just your name, your agency, and your role at that agency quickly. It's only going to take us about a minute to do that so that we can all see who's a part of this learning journey with us.
It's great. We have public health nurses, outreach coordinators, and case managers, educators, dietitians, preschool teachers. How awesome. Psychologists.
You're so good at this, Beth. It's moving so fast. My eyes are doing like this.
Family navigators and dental care coordinators. Some of the local First Five folks, YMCA teacher. Oh, what a rich group we have.
Awesome. Awesome.
Yeah, really, really
I
awesome.
see someone from Roots Community Center.
Yes, yay,
Awesome.
Roots.
Awesome.
Awesome.
Thank you all.
Early childhood educators. That's really great. Head Start teachers.
Awesome. You can keep that going. So this session is part of something that I titled Tender and Tough Topics. And I titled it that because over the years, this is my 28th year in early childhood and elementary education, teachers, social workers, specialists, clinicians, directors, and myself included, and families have all experienced on some end of the continuum what I call tender and tough topics. Topics that people experience as tough, so we pull away from them, or topics that feel so tender that we retreat. Overindulgence in the lives of young children is one of those topics. And you may be wondering why. And that's what we're going to learn about today, why overindulgence in early childhood is a tender and tough topic, mainly because it's become a rising risk factor in the lives of developing young children. We're going to learn together why and what we can do about that. So First Five will be has virtually hosted, if you look on the screen, all the ones with a red star, First Five Alameda County has already provided. We started with homelessness in the early years, right when the state of California got shut down. We switched over and did a virtual training on the spot. We moved towards death and dying and grief, and today we're covering overindulgence. So I want you all to stay tuned because you all are going to dictate what the next one is going to be. So we're going to take a poll at the end so that you all can say, here is what we want, because your choices are important to us, okay? So as we start, I want you all to take a look at this because this is what today is about. It's about adult behavior change, because what we find is that overindulgence in young children, it's about us, the adults in their lives. Adult behavior is the key to closing the opportunity gap that starts by 12 months of age for young children. We know adults do not change their behavior. And any of you who are supervisors and managers, and you have to work with other adults, it's not easy to change their behavior. We have to use research-proven techniques to change adult behavior. And that's what we're doing today. We're going to present some research-based information around overindulgence and affluence in young children, and what we need to know and what we can do differently to support them in the coming weeks and months and years. So we're going to take a look at a short video. This video is about letting children fail. It's a short video. She moves fast. She talks fast. So I want you to consider this notion of allowing children to fail in terms of the language use. The word fail, most parents and adults retreat from it because we don't want children to fail. So really language is key. So when we watch this, I want you to hold in mind how you can reframe and rephrase the word fail, because children need opportunities and experiences to try and try and try again. And child development confirms, and I saw all the early childhood educators who signed in, child development confirms the necessity of repetition in the child's development and their acquisition of any skill or ability. I like to call it productive struggle. Children need periods of frustration and opportunities to not always win or place first. So as we look at this, consider how we can support children in what she calls failing, but what I like to call productive struggle.
The world is a cruel place. Yes, it is. Mommy and daddy can't be there to make everything work for you. I think one of the toughest things as a parent is letting your child fail. I'm not a rock star when it comes to watching my kid fail. I don't like it. We don't want to see them disappointed. We don't want them to be hurt, but they're gonna learn. You're not gonna get everything you want in life. I see it with school projects. When a parent is putting all this work and effort into the kid's project, you talk to employers, they hear from parents when their kid didn't get a job. Stop. We've got to take a huge step back. I mean, didn't we learn from all the failures along the way? If we don't let our kids experience that when they're growing up, what's going to happen when they're adults? They're not going to know how to deal. Being helicopter parents and trying to fix everything for them, we're basically ensuring that they will be in therapy when they're grown-ups.
Okay, she got right to the point. So we want to hear from some of you after watching and listening to that short video. As professionals across the continuum, what are some ways you've seen or heard adults refuse to let children fail, or adults become helicopter parents? What are some of the things you've seen in practice? Just type it in the chat box for about 30 seconds and we'll see how many we can get in 30 seconds. Some things that you've seen or heard, parents and adults who are helicopter parents, and they refuse to let children fail, and things that they've done to prevent that.
I see people saying doing their homework for them.
Mm-hmm. I have a cousin whose mother used to do that.
Yes, redoing their homework. Someone said feeding, and that's very interesting because that is also based on culture, right? Feeding children.
Mm-hmm.
No, let me show you is what a parent says to a child. They hear that. And
I see lots of redoing their homework, Beth.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. A parent coming to school and wanting to confront a child that hit their child the day before.
Ooh.
Yeah. Let's see. Helping them. Let's see. Driving things to school when the child forgets something. Let's see. Don't take that book, it's too hard for you. See,
wow.
Advocating to their teacher for their child's needs. So some of that, it's kind of a spectrum, isn't it, Shawn? Where
it is. Thank you, Beth. I see I am the adult, I know better. So what the research behind overindulgence and helicopter parenting has taught us is that
the world is a...
Parents love their children. They really love their children and they want the best for them, but they end up overindulging young children and preventing them from failing because of love. But there's a way out. There's a way out in terms of adults building some skills and some capacities to support young children. So thank you all for helping us there. So we need to start by defining overindulgence. And on your screen, you see kind of two definitions from two different researchers that are very similar around overindulgence. And some of it I've highlighted around developmental tasks, which is going to be one of the things we discussed today, having so much of anything and the negative effects. So basically, overindulgence is giving children too much of what looks good to them too soon and for too long. It is giving them things or experiences that are not always age appropriate for their interests or their talents or desires. It's the process of giving things to children that meets, here's the big piece, it's the process of giving things to children that meets the adult's need, not the child's. Really, really important. Leah and I were just having this conversation before we logged on with everyone. Adults simply need to make a few course corrections. And I'm simply saying, simply need to make a few course corrections, but those corrections are actually hard because it's behavior change. Remember that slide 4 slides ago about behavior change in adults? If we want the child's behavior to change, the adult has to change their behavior. So an example is children who are overindulged experience, here's the big piece, scarcity in their minds in the midst of plenty. Children who are overindulged actually believe they don't have a lot when they actually have too much. It's one of the negative effects of overindulging young children. Overindulgence is doing or having so much of something that it creates active harm, or sometimes prevents a child from developing and deprives that child from achieving to his or her full potential or their full potential. So some background. Over the last 3 decades, the overindulgence research has found that a few things they believe has led to overindulgence. One of the things is around how family structures have shifted. Family structures in the past were one of the adults went to work and the other adult stayed home. There were multiple children. There were 3 and 4 kids in most homes. What we find now is that most homes have 1 child. And if they have multiple children, they're putting lots of years between those children. So they're having fewer children, and the adults in that home, regardless of the makeup, if it's 2 moms, a dad and a papa, a mom and a dad, an uncle and an aunt, what they find is that most adults are working out of the home now, and some of the guilt that adults experience for that, they overindulge young children. In addition to, our society actually values overindulgence. It really does, in multiple ways, and we're going to explore that soon. Before we do that, we're going to go into a poll question, but I was just thinking of something that I shared with Beth. When I was doing the research for this, I found this quote from the artist Jay-Z, and he was quoted saying, if you can't afford something twice, if you can't buy something twice, you can't afford it. And when I read the comment, the quote, I thought, oh my goodness. So you're saying if I can't buy my house twice, I can't afford the one that I'm in, that I actually can afford? But this is that overindulgent, affluent mindset that takes over and shifts reality. For someone like that, who has so many followers and believes what he says, I think it was a comment that requires some stepping back. So we're going to hear from you all again, but we're going to hear from you differently. We're going to take a poll. So Leah, if you could put up our first poll question. In your experience, does overindulgence come up seldom, sometimes, or frequently?
You know, the polls are all anonymous, so you can answer these poll questions without worrying that we know who you are who answered it.
That's right, they're anonymous.
I see that the poll is slowing down, so I'm going to go ahead and end the poll in 3 seconds.
Okay, so it looks like most people said sometimes. A few people said seldom. And in second, we had frequently. So 62 people said sometimes, and 44 people said frequently. So thank you all for participating in that. Thank you, Leah. So let's dig deeper into overindulgence. So I'm going to get through this slide quickly because it just talks about some of the research around developmental neglect, which to me is really big because I'm in early childhood and family studies. So developmental neglect is not about feeling loved. If emotional neglect is about not feeling loved, developmental neglect is about not being competent and responsible, as well as not feeling loved. So this whole notion of competence, when I dug deep, I said, oh, this makes perfect sense. And it makes perfect sense because too often overindulgent families are really not concerned with competence. They're concerned with confidence, that their child or children feel confident. But we actually have found out that confidence does not precede competence. Competence comes first, then we become confident. So overindulged children are actually provided with this notion of feel confident before they can be competent in any area, which causes some of the struggle. And the research looked at adults, because they have been tracking adults for almost 38 years, who were overindulged as children. And some of the things those adults said was, I don't seem capable of dealing with most problems that come up in my life. I have some friends like that. I have money management problems. And these are persistent money management problems. I don't feel competent as a parent. I have little control over my child. I don't know what is enough of anything: food, clothing, money, alcohol, sex, entertainment, you name it. I don't feel effective. These are what adults who were overindulged said later. The next piece, they looked at dysfunctional attitudes and thinking. These were really prevalent around confusing wants with needs. Children who are overindulged become teenagers and become adults who easily confuse their wants with their needs. Really, really important for us to get that as parents, as teachers, as adults in the lives of developing young children. They develop this sense of I'm not enough and I'll never be enough. They develop this sense of it's never my fault. I don't like what you did, or I don't like what I did, but it's still not my fault. That sounds very familiar to me, someone who I see on television almost every day. And they develop this sense of having difficulty finding meaning during times of hardship from overindulgence. The next one is parenting and teaching. The big piece is that parents who overindulge their children and some teachers who overindulge their students found that they all took the mindset of me nor this child is responsible for their behavior. I'm going to say that again. Me nor this child is responsible for their behavior. It's quite dangerous to put a child in that situation where you're saying, I'm not, nor are you responsible for your behavior, which really looks at limits and boundaries not being in place. Again, overindulgence meets the needs of the adult, not the child. The adult, not the child. Overindulgent parents tend to provide their children with their wants and needs out of unconditional love, like I said earlier. Teachers also overindulge too. So today, while there are 9 aspects of overindulgence that was pulled from the research, we're going to focus on 4 of those aspects today. We're going to focus on the influences to overindulge, and we're really going to look at the parent and family and the school and the teacher primarily, even though we fit into all of those, most of us I see. We're going to look at 3 ways that adults overindulge. Then we're going to look at what I found a strategy that I was really pulled in by because I'm trying to use it in other areas, what they call the test of 4. The test of 4 to figure out if you're overindulging or not. And of course, we're going to consider developmental pathways that get in the way of effective, positive development for young children who are overindulged. So as we move forward, if there are questions, type them in the chat box and Beth will stop me and I will respond.
One of the things, Shawn, that was asked earlier was about this whole idea of feeding and how to identify and respect when a parent feeding a child is cultural, when it is appropriate and when it is inappropriate for a preschooler. That is a kind of I think that'd be.
No, Beth, I see that Karen Berry wrote that. Is
Yes.
there a way, it just may or may not be possible, because we didn't talk about this earlier, Beth. Is it a way if Karen has the ability to unmute that one person so that I can hear what the question is? Because you made more of a statement, so I don't want to fill in the blanks.
Sure. Let me see.
I think it's a great statement, but I want to get to the gist of what their
question is.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Let me see if I can find her here.
But I do.
I've asked her to, I've unmuted, or
Okay.
tried to unmute. Let's see. But she has to unmute on her end too.
Okay, so what we know is that, like the person wrote, feeding is cultural. So what we need to do is to get to this level of understanding what's important for the family.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're considering, because food can be overindulged. So if they're considering that child is saying, I want this, and I never told no, then we need to consider what we call the test of 4. to help that family figure out, or those adults figure out, if they're overindulging this child in the negative effects of it. And those are things that we present to families, and they do that on their own. Or if you have a parent training program, you would do it over and over with them. So they're really being introspective and figuring out, oh, every time my child asks for a juice or a cookie, I give it to them. And I've set up this pattern that may or may not have anything to do with my culture, or it could have something to do with adults telling children, finish everything on your plate, eat all the food on your plate, even if they're full, which has some historical tenets in it for certain people in this country who didn't always have enough to eat. So leaving food is considered wasteful, you know, it's considered a bad thing. So really understanding where that comes from. So it's that both and of how do I honor a family and what they bring, or how do I honor what I like to call my brother, my brother son, his oldest son will be 17 this year. And when he was first born, I remember trying to give him some advice. And he kind of told me, look, because I'm the eldest, he said, I'm LOTJ. And I was like, what is that? He said, this is my first child. I'm learning on the job. I intend to make some mistakes. It's not all going to be perfect, but it's going to be okay. So some of the stance we have to hold is parents are sometimes learning. So instead of saying this is what you should do all the time, or what you're doing isn't right, holding that they're learning. And we all know that learning can be a struggle if we're asked to change our behavior. So I think as it concerns feeding, entering multiple pathways to understand what's going on, because it could be a number of things across the continuum. And what we know that, you know, most adults who engage in children's lives, how we were parented shows up even when we don't want it to. I know I catch myself often, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, that sounds just like my mother. That sounds just like my dad. And, you know, we grew up thinking, I'm never going to say that. I'm never going to do that. So I think all of those things converge on families unconsciously and consciously when they're trying to parent young children. So thank you for that, Karen Berry. It's okay you don't have a mic. No worries, no worries. But I think that's a great piece to consider. Thank you, Beth. So if you look here, we said influences to overindulge, 3 ways to overindulge, the test of 4, and developmental pathways. So we're going to really look at now, how does this overindulging occur? It occurs in 3 different areas. So there's material overindulgence. And I created these 2 charts just to juxtapose what it could look like, because there are many, many ways inside a home and what it could look like inside a learning institution in terms of material overindulgence, where we really are pushing children to lacking appreciation and respect. And it creates this blown up sense of entitlement that really has connections to affluence. Overindulgence is really thought of as having too many toys or spoiling, but it is much more. It is much more than that. Adults who were chronically overindulged told us, I had too much freedom and too much independence too early. And we're going to talk about that later. And my parents gave me everything, but what I wanted was them, not everything. Really, really big here around this material overindulgence and what it leads to, the wasting and destroying of toys and materials, developing the give me, give me, give me, give me, give me. Everything is fine or it's mine. And this notion of this overscheduled child. So you're in preschool, you're in kindergarten all day long. Then when you leave on Tuesdays, you're going to soccer practice. On Wednesdays, we have swimming. On Thursdays, we have music. On Saturdays, we have basketball. And then we have choir. I know children who are 5 and 6, and these are the things that their parents are carrying them to every single day after they've been in school all day, because their parents believe this is helpful to my child because I love them. But you know what we're finding? The children haven't asked for any of it, none of it at all. So this overscheduled in terms of things, because I have the money to pay for the fees, doesn't mean my child needs to be a part of all of it. So I'm seeing that Karen, mic is working now, Beth. So do we want to take the question or do we want to move forward? I'm flexible and open.
Okay, well, Karen, do you want to try to, let's see if we unmute you here. Let's see, trying to find that here.
Okay, you should be able to talk.
Thank you so much.
No worries.
My question, I'm a director of a preschool. We have lots of children who are fed at home and who eat lunch at school together with us, but don't appear to have the skills at 3.5 years old to effectively feed themselves. And so it's a challenge for us to balance the respect for the cultural feeding at home when their setting at school doesn't allow for that to happen in a classroom with their teacher.
Okay, I know exactly what you're saying, Karen. So I'm gonna repeat it to make sure that I understand it correctly. The feeding styles at home are not the same feeding styles at school. At home, I'm fed. So what we call this in early childhood is children who come from interdependent families and children who come from independent families. So an interdependent family, oftentimes, and this is, you brought up an excellent question, because it doesn't always mean it's overindulgence, because there are cultural underpinnings for children who come from families where everyone sits down and eats together. They share the meal. The family may graduate from high school and college and work, and they'll still stay there. They'll get married, and all the family lives together because that is completely normal for them, compared to the Western model that says, I need you to walk as soon as possible. I need you to be able to put your pants on as soon as possible and be self-sufficient and have all these self-help skills as early as possible. And group care actually does that. What we find is parents put their children into group care, not realizing that some of what they're doing here clashes with what we're doing at home. So what I find is that if we lean in and have gentle conversations with families around, hey, I see that you're doing this at home and this kid loves it. At school, we don't have the manpower. So I'm wondering, could you support us in helping the child to be more self-sufficient at 3.5 when they're feeding themselves lunch at the table? And just have that back and forth over time. The other part is children are very observant. They're very observant. I've had this happen to me where we would have a child who would show up at the school and that child was still drinking a bottle, and none of the other children were drinking bottles or sippy cups anymore. And in a week, that kid couldn't even find their bottle or sippy cup because they were watching the other kids spill their milk or water out of the cup. So part of what we have to do is, stay grounded and know that it takes time. It won't happen in the first conversation where we're planting the seed. Sometimes it won't happen in the third or fourth one, but they're hearing us and they're going back and forth with how do we do this to support children. The other piece is children are great at what Janet Gonzalez-Mena writes about in terms of compartmentalization. Meaning they know the rules change from home to school. Children know that, but what we have to do is name it for them and not leave it invisible so that they have to figure it out for themselves. So what we do is we'll say, Shawn, I know at home your grandma Audrey feeds you, but at school, we all feed ourselves. Now today, Miss Beth is going to help you. I'll do one and then you do one. Is that okay? So we have to give them the ground to walk on, to move from that home-based situation to that school-based situation, because they're not the same. Was that helpful, Karen?
Yes, very much. Thank you so much.
No worries. Great. Thank you, Beth. Thank you, Leah, for opening that up.
Sure.
Meet real needs. Somebody had asked me to go back to slides, so I'm moving to the next one now. So the next, we did material overindulgence. The next one is relational overindulgence. These, parents, they over-nurture. I heard someone say, I think it was Latoya, hi Toya, she just had her first baby, not letting a child who's learning to walk fall down as part of that learning to walk process. That could be it. I'm just not going to let you hurt yourself at all, or what I deem to be you hurting yourself. I'm going to prevent any of that from happening, which means I probably will carry you a lot more than I should. At school, we could be giving 1 or 2 children way too much of our attention. At home, at school, doing things for children that they can do for themselves, is what Karen just stated. The list goes on and on and on. I like this one. I get to open your gifts, mommy, not you. And at school, I become first in line. And I'm laughing because one of my nephews did that before to my grandmother. He said, "Can I open your gift, grandma?" And she was about to let him open it. And then she ended up saying, "You can open it with me." But he was the first grandchild and she was happy to be grandmother. So I guess that was the reason. But as we see here, this relational overindulgence actually isn't what children need. The third one is structural overindulgence. This is a big one for me, at least, in terms of having poor boundaries and limits and how children learn irresponsibility. The research, they call it soft structure. Soft structure is basically having no rules. It's really having no rules. There's too much freedom. You do as you please. You don't have to clean up behind yourself, even as a toddler. If you pull out all your toys, you leave them there. There's no sharing of, let's put the toys back in the toy box. You do it for me, mommy. You do it for me, daddy. You do it for me, big brother and sister. You do it for me, Abuelita. You do it for me, Tia. And these children quickly develop this sense of being victimized, that they're the victim. And these things play out in school also, having no expectations and no limits, play with no purpose, no limits within structure. So what we find is that structural guidance should have freedom within the limits. So here are the limits, and my freedom is all here. What we find is that when there are no limits within the structure, that's because the structure doesn't exist. It's wide open. And the list goes on and on and on, and I've listed a few of those there. I'm going to tap into little to no intellectual development, something we don't talk enough about in early childhood. So what we often talk about is this notion of, we have social emotional development, and then we have academic or cognitive development. But in between those are really this piece called intellectual development that guides us, the ability to question, to think for ourselves, to ask questions. And young children as old as 3 can do that if it's developed. And what we find is when there's structural overindulgence, there's little to no intellectual development for young children.
Shawn,
Yes, Beth.
there's an interesting question about someone is asking to hear more about resisting, embracing, or touching for relational overindulgence. Wanted to hear a little bit more about that.
Oh, so basically children who are oftentimes over nurtured, they end up resisting wanting people to touch them. So if I could walk, or they develop a fear almost, is what they said, of other people. So if I'm holding my 3-year-old and my 4-year-old when they can walk and they're in the room full of other children, but I'm holding them because I'm over nurturing, because I deem that some of the 4-year-olds are playing roughly, and I hold my kid, that over nurturing can lead them towards, when I'm not there and they're in the social group, they don't want anyone to touch them, the teacher or another child, because of it's an effect of the over nurturing.
So is it sort of like reminding people to follow the lead of the child and what they need, instead of going with your parent or as a teacher, your need to hold the child? Is that kind of it? That following the lead of the child?
It's both and, Beth.
Both and?
It's both
okay.
and. So a lot of the overindulgence is child-centered, but we actually have children who come from family-centered 21st century homes, which is great. The family is taken into consideration, not just the isolated child. Here, what we have is too much of it. Not that it's bad, but too much of it actually ruptures what should have been developing differently. I hope that's helpful for the person who actually
Yes, thank you.
All right, so I kind of mentioned some of this earlier, so we're going to get into it a different way. There are 3 types of overindulgence. There are 3 types. Adults give too much, we over nurture, or we provide soft structure. We give too much to children. giving too much to children can actually harm them. And this just isn't in middle upper class families or affluent families. All families in all walks of life share the goal of wanting to do the best for their child and can overindulge by showering them with an abundance of things that they don't need or don't even want, and oftentimes cannot handle. Giving children things or experiences that are not appropriate for their age or their interests or their talents, like we said earlier. So too many toys, like we see here in this picture, too many camps, too many activities, all this rushing around from one activity to another can be stressful and unarticulated for the young child, having no downtime to fill themselves without the help of preset scheduled entertainment, which is what overindulgent parents and adults often provide children with. Often these things are things that children can do for themselves, but the over-nurturing prevents kids from becoming competent in everything from helping around the house to developing coping skills or this interpersonal skill around how am I in the world with other people. When parents provide little discipline and few boundaries, perhaps these are rules that are not in place that should be in place, or rules that are in place that are not enforced, which is actually really damaging when we don't have follow through as an adult. This includes anything from contributing, being a 2-year-old who puts their toys back in their box after they play with them, to household tasks. When they become preteens or adolescents, maybe it's taking out the trash, maybe it's bringing the trash from the bathroom to the bigger can and taking it outside, whatever it is. Or maybe it's just cleaning up your room or keeping your bed made. All of those things build the inner working for children. So when they're replaced with the parent or an adult doing it and the child never having that, it builds the opposite.
There's an interesting question about someone asking if overindulgence can fall heaviest on some of the children in a family and not others. So for example, first child experiences overindulgent parenting, but the subsequent children get less perhaps because of strained resources. And then another one is asking about overindulgence leading to a child being bullied or being a bully. Interesting questions.
Okay, so that second one I'm gonna answer first, because the research found that actually children who were overindulged, they didn't develop a bully mentality because they actually struggled socially emotionally in terms of, I'm better than you, so I'm not gonna be around you. So that opportunity to be a bully, it wasn't even present because of how they see themselves in the world. So thank you for that question. What was the first one, Beth?
The first one is, can overindulgence fall on some children in the family? So some children experience the overindulgence in a family, but the others not so much. So, maybe the oldest child gets an abundance of overindulgence, but the other children don't, or maybe the youngest gets most indulged. Just wondering about that.
Okay, so 2 things happen. What we found was that many children who were overindulged in wealthier homes, they were the only child. So there was no sibling to actually overindulge. But because overindulgence can happen in families with very low socioeconomic or financial wealth, it can still happen, meaning the overindulgence could be, you're taking me to McDonald's 3 times a week to buy me a $4 Happy Meal that seems cheap, but for us it's expensive, but I'm overindulging in this way that I really shouldn't be. So it happens across that line. And what we find is that parents who overindulge one child overindulge the other child.
Okay.
Yeah, those are great questions. Thank you, Beth.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Let me see, where was I? 3 types of overindulgence. Okay, we talked about the dual working families or couples. Parents oftentimes feel like it's faster to do things themselves. So they end up not asking their child or children to do anything, not realizing that it's overindulging that child or those children. What we find is that out of these 3, number 2 and number 3, over-nurturing and soft structure in particular, can lead to children developing a sense of helplessness or being ill-prepared later in life. As adults, overindulged children The adults who were overindulged as children were identified with having, we're going back to this, life goals of wanting wealth, fame, and image. Wealth, fame, and image. Think reality stars. So we're building a nation of children whose goal it is to be a reality star because of overindulgence. Children who are overindulged tend to blame someone else if something goes wrong, which is a big, big behavior to look out for. So now we're going to move into our second poll question. Our second poll question that Leah's going to put up for us.
Okay, it should be launched.
Which type of overindulgence do you struggle with as a parent, teacher, or adult? Giving too much, over-nurturing, or soft structure?
Seeing a lot of activity on the poll, so we're going to leave it open for a little bit.
Just Shawn, there was a comment about overindulgence and developmental delay.
I saw that, Beth. I'm tracking them. What I'm thinking is
great.
There's some really good ones here.
There are really.
I was thinking two things, Beth.
Yeah.
Depending on time, because I don't want to skip someone because there's so many that are really questions that I can come back to them and do it two ways, and we can talk about that. But I want to answer them all in some way, either through a little response tip sheet or just making a video that we can upload to YouTube.
Yes, if we don't get to your questions, what we can do is print out the chat and then we can send them to Shawn, and Shawn will do his best to answer them in some form or fashion. So please just know we really would love to get to everyone's question, but we may not be able to. So it's great. There's the poll.
Awesome. All right, so it looks like most people, this over-nurturing is what it is. I see Freddie had a question. Has overindulgence been linked to alcohol or substance abuse? Actually, Affluence has. It's Affluence, which kind of connects to overindulgence, but Affluence, when we get to that, is linked to substance abuse and alcohol being a substance that affluent teens and adults end up abusing. So great question, Freddie. So using the test of 4, favorite part that I appreciate in terms of digging deep more into overindulgence. So what the researchers found, the team of researchers, was that a couple of things are going on for parents and adults. And what they said was a yes response to any 4 of these questions is a signal that overindulgence may be occurring with the parent, adult, or teacher. A yes to any one of these, developmental tasks, family resources, whose needs, depleting, and harm, a yes to any one of those is a signal, or I call a flashing red light, that you're possibly overindulging a child or your children. There's a note here though. What might be overindulgent for one child may not be overindulgent for another. Really, really important. That's always present. We all know that, right? So those 4 are really, does what I'm giving this child get in the way of their learning a developmental task? Learning how to walk, learning how to feed themselves, learning how to be social, learning how to be around other children, learning how to play with other children, learning how to interplay, learning how to make a request. All these things that children have to be taught and modeled. They don't just show up and they're able to do it. Or learning how to deal with not being first, learning how to deal with failure, learning how to deal with mistakes. All of those are developmental tasks that need to be modeled and repeated for children over and over and over again. Are we using a lot of the family resources? The 6-year-old wants to go to McDonald's every day, and I'm doing it, but I really can't afford it. That's a family resource of money. Whose need is being met? Is it my need being met when I let my 3-year-old and 8-year-old stay up until whatever time they fall asleep? on a Tuesday because it's easier than me making them go to sleep and having to follow through my needs being met. Does their request deplete or harm others, some property, the environment, those around them in the family or in the classroom community? So these are our 4 questions we need to ask ourselves around figuring out if we're overindulging or helping a family or a parent figure out if they're overindulging a child or children. And these things, you know, they go from everything to should my child get a treat or toy every time we go shopping, which is how one of my god kids was, and one of my nephews. Is my child going to share some of the household tasks? Does every preschooler in my classroom have a job to make them a part, or do we not have classroom jobs and the teachers kind of do it all for themselves and feel taxed when if I'm doing 8 things, 6 of them, the community of learners could have done themselves? So what are we robbing children of in our hurry to do things for them that they can do themselves? So how do we slow down to figure that out? So what we find is, again, this test of 4. So in the map that they use, they basically create, like, it's a piece of paper and they draw 2 lines across to create 4 triangles. And they put developmental tasks, family resources, needs, depleting, and harm with question marks. And families can repeatedly come back to that to list what's there in terms of overindulgence, to see how many areas they're overindulging in and help them distinguish needs from wants for that child. Should I buy my child a new pair of sneakers when I really need a coat because it's cold, but my child doesn't need a new pair of sneakers? Some parents actually grapple with that. Some parents attempt to give children everything they need, but not everything they want, even if they can't afford it, which is a good thing. The other part around seeking out child development knowledge, using things like First Fives, Help Me Grow, the Center for the Developing Child at Harvard, our resources and referrals, Bananas, Hively, 4Cs. All of these places are a wealth of child development information that we can't just do this old thing of giving parents pamphlets. We've got to figure out what's in the pamphlet, master it, so that we can articulate it back to the families when it's appropriate to have a back and forth conversation instead of, here's something you need to read to help you and your child. We have years of work and research that tells us that doesn't work. I see a question over here. Does it meet the parents' need at the expense of the child's need? Maybe number 3. So creating rules. In addition to creating structure for the rules, it's important to follow through with the appropriate consequences if the rules are broken, which is what most parents struggle with. They don't want to hurt their kids' feelings. They don't want their child to feel sad and a host of other things, but the follow through is discipline. You're going to hear me say that over and over again. The follow through is discipline. When we can follow through, we actually build not just ourselves by practicing that in our brains and in our actions, but we build our child's capacity to deal with not getting their way or having their wants met over and over and over. And for those families and teachers where there are multiple adults in the classroom, or there are multiple adults in the home, what we find is this notion of all the adults need to say yes, but only one adult can say no. So if I'm saying yes to a want, I need to make sure that Beth is saying yes to that want also. But if I say no, I don't need to be in agreement around the no. We're talking about overindulgence. We're not just talking about everything. We're talking about moving away from the practices of overindulging children to not overindulging them. The researchers found that really worked in supporting parents and adults who were overindulging young children. Like I said earlier, often this notion of overindulging young children comes from having good intentions and wanting their child to be happy. Parenting is difficult, and anyone that's a parent can attest to it. It's difficult at times, specifically times like this. But raising likable, positive, productive, self-sufficient, and respectful children is the great reward if we can build strategies and resources to move away from overindulging children. So I put this one in here as we move towards the 3 core structures. as something that I want us all to consider, that a little walk of 20 minutes in nature can help children, and they're talking about children with ADHD, but it actually helps children and adults concentrate better. So what the research actually says is, if we can spend 20 minutes in nature with things that are blue, green, and brown spaces, that's nature. The blue is typically the sky. The green is basically the grass, the trees in nature, and the brown that we find in nature that actually calms us. And the research has confirmed this over and over and over for anxious children who are overindulged, and you're trying to build strategies to move away from that. Spending time in nature can be a great resource for you and them. Is there a question, Beth?
Yeah, just a little time check. We've got about a half an hour, Shawn.
Okay, we're doing good.
Doing okay? Okay.
I'm going to pick up. Thank you, Beth.
Yeah.
So when there's a challenge, like an overindulged child, and a parent or an adult trying to work away from it, the three core considerations are these things called safety, satisfaction, and connection. And what usually happens is, when we're telling them no, but we've always told them yes, they feel threatened. They feel rejection. They might feel lost. And then what the adult usually does is they give into it, and they end up giving them what they need. When the goal is to move from the red to the yellow to the green, because the green is where we want to be. The green zone is developing that inner peace of contentment, or, as I said earlier, competence that leads to confidence. And we do that with children. We don't expect them to do it alone. So Dr. Bruce Perry, who I adore, and many other neuroscientists and people who are doing this work often talk about fight, flight, freeze responses. But what I love about Dr. Perry is he reminds us that the first alarm center, and this is that overindulgence, there's a lot of research around overindulgence in ACE, where they kind of talk about the similarities and why developmental neglect or overindulgence is a part of overindulgence is considered developmental neglect. Dr. Perry reminds us that before we fight, flight, or freeze, young children and adults, but young children actually fawn. So that fawning state is, did you hear that? Did you see that? And oftentimes we may say, I didn't hear anything. I didn't see anything. And the child begins to escalate. What they need is, what did you hear? What did it sound like? To lean in, because that actually can help them to start to de-escalate. So really understanding the connection to children who are overindulged when their want isn't met, to prevent that from escalating, really catching them in that state of saying, tell me what's going on for you, is a strategy. Just another quote that I love and wanted to share with you all, because it talks about connection, which is oftentimes what overindulged children are saying they're not getting. I'm not connecting with my parent, my mom, my dad, my abuelita, my tia. I'm not connecting with anybody. People are giving me things, but I'm not connecting. So the connection is the strategy. So here's some things that we can do as adults. Definitely identify which type of overindulgence we're using. Of course, using the test of 4. Teach children to respect people and things. And we do that over and over and over. Enforcing rules and deciding what the rules are going to be. Having reasonable, logical consequences, and that logical consequence needs to meet the child's age. So what we would expect a 3.5-year-old to do, we won't expect the 7-year-old to do. What I expect the 7-year-old to do, I don't expect the 14-year-old to do. So really understanding that around giving too much, over nurturing, and soft structure. Here are some things that we all can use to start that change. And after time, just pick one. Address each one if you have more than one at a time, just one at a time. So we have to continue to model and insist that children fix what they broke, for example, demonstrate respect for people, places, and things through our daily interactions. Here, we're going to learn some new skills as an adult. When I do that, in terms of supporting the child, I'm learning the new skill in tandem with them. And of course, that follow through with the rules and expectations is really important. it's the best thing that you can give a child is actually follow through. For example, everyone has a job at the home and the school. Put your clothes in the hamper at home, hold the lid on the trash can at school, push the broom to help us pick up what we broke at home, hold the door at school and help the teacher clean the table or ring the bell or clean up the yard. All of these things are practical strategies to help overindulged children come back. Overindulgence puts children at risk for pain and difficulty well into adulthood, and it's been documented, and I said it earlier. Overindulgence ruptures our perception of people, places, and things. I'll say it again. Overindulgence ruptures our perception of people, places, and things, and it kills our relationships, which is why the children who turn into teens, who turn into adults, who all articulated, say what they were needing was connection in relationship. Not materials, not things, but connection. I like this quote, so I just included it again. I see you, you are important to me, and I value you. Now I'm gonna move into this developmental neglect. So think consistent problematic practices, which is what developmental neglect is. So we say that developmental neglect is failing to offer the environment so that children can accomplish those developmental tasks. And some of you listed those things earlier. Overindulgence is developmental neglect. It is developmental neglect, okay? The research points to evidence that chronic parental overindulgence is a source of developmental neglect. Overindulgence is a form of child neglect because it hinders children from performing what's needed developmentally and from them learning necessary life lessons at any age. So there's some support though. So I've included in English and Spanish. Our friends at the Search Institute created 40 developmental assets. So I've included here the ones for preschoolers, and in the handouts folder, I included the ones for kindergarten and third grade also, but they go up to high school. So if you go to their website, they'll let you download them. They're all in English and Spanish. But they look at internal and external assets, meaning a variety of things that we should be supporting children in developing over time as a response to developmental neglect and to keep us away from developmental neglect. Beth, do I hear you?
Yes, sorry, there is an interesting question about does it make sense to model behavior and exceptions until a child reaches the developmental capacity to accomplish the task? I think that's reference to a previous slide, but I'm not quite sure I fully understand.
Me neither, Beth. That's what I was thinking. I'm glad you said it.
Yeah, but I think, I mean, it seems to me that we always want to model appropriate behavior for young children. And if it's a developmental task that they're not able to accomplish, we still model the appropriate response. Sorry, I guess this person meant instead of doing it for them.
I'm reading it too.
Yeah, and
definitely.
I think
so here's what we want to do. I understand, Erica. If I can do it myself, as much as possible, allow me to do it. But sometimes, even though I can do it for myself, it's nice to have something bestowed upon us. So once we've moved away from, as the adult, the overindulging, because we're talking about overindulgent. So once I've moved away from my behavior of overindulging a child, then of course it's okay to bestow something. Here's a living example. I'm a full-grown adult. We're quarantining. I can cook for myself, but my mother cooked yesterday because I'm in her space right now. She cooked. She bestowed it upon me. I told her she didn't have to. She did it. I ate the food we ate. It was delicious. Even though I can do it on my own sometimes. So it's not like I'm here and she's just having to cook for me every day and I'm a grown person who's capable of doing it on my own. So I hope that makes sense, Erica, but you're on the right path. Once I can do it on my own and the adult has moved away from overindulging, then we're on the right path to come back.
And the steps towards that is kind of like a scaffolding. You scaffold a child's developmental progress, maybe.
And it begins to repair the relationship that now I'm doing this thing for you differently. You actually like, grilled chicken sandwiches. I'm going to make you a grilled chicken sandwich because I think you did an awesome job at school today, or whatever it is, but this doesn't happen every single day because I can do it on my own and achieve success. So thank you, Erica. I'm gonna get through these ones kind of quick because you can all find these at the Center for the Developing Child, but we're talking about child development. 8 things that they basically said we need to consider around child development and what young children need. The first one is about infants and young children and stress in the environment from any caregiver at home or at school. Even infants and young children experience adversity. Number 2 is that development is a highly interactive process. This is that back and forth for what we call serve and return, like playing tennis between the child and adult. That is not just my genes, but it's the environment and my genes together. So think back to that nature-nurture argument that used to exist that's now moot. You know, epigenetics says that actually has how my genes are expressed, meaning what's around me has an effect on that. Number 3, responsive caregivers. Any person who's involved in a child's life becomes a caregiver, and we need to be responsive and attuned to them as support. Number 4, I like this one because this is something that Dr. Jack Shankar says most people get wrong, and it's a myth around. We say, oh, by age 2.5, the child's brain is, 95% the size it's going to be. So people hear, oh, the child's brain is this size, so the window of opportunity has closed, and that isn't true. The physical size is what we're talking about here, but the brain is still developing and taking in information for development. It's just the size that has slowed down to the size it's going to be as an adult. We need to consider that. I'm moving through these quickly because the last one is really what I want you all to hear. Severe neglect appears to be, at least as great a threat to health and development as physical abuse. We talked about that in terms of developmental neglect. Number 6, young children who have experienced or exposed to adversity or violence are not necessarily stress-related disorders that turn into violent adults. Because some people say, oh, if this happened to you, you're going to be this adult. Not true. And of course, simply removing a child from a dangerous environment does not automatically reverse the effects of the stress or the impacts of that negative stress, the negative effects of the stress on the developing child. I was in a hurry to get to this slide. Resilience requires relationships, not rugged individualism. This is really important because we're talking about overindulgence. So as the adult changes and we want the child to change, what we start thinking about in terms of developmental neglect is, oh, do it on your own, be resilient, but that happens in relationship. I was on 2 other virtual learning sessions this week, and they both said the same thing about trauma and resilience as if it's something that the child and children do on their own. That is not true. They do it with us through connection and relationship. The same thing happens for overindulgence. I just had to get that out. Another chart here. I'm not going to go over the whole one because I want to focus on some things. So basically, we know that there are 4 parenting styles that have been researched: the authoritative, the permissive, the authoritarian, and the unengaged, or sometimes permissive is called laissez-faire, the unengaged or uninvolved. They all have impacts on children. And then teaching styles: the brick wall teacher, the jellyfish teacher, the backbone teacher, and the flexible teacher. So I'll just say out loud, the best teaching style is the flexible one. The most effective parenting style is the authoritative one. The worst parenting style is permissive. It's permissive, and we're going to talk about that in an upcoming slide. Here's why these parenting styles vary. I'm just doing this quickly. The authoritative parenting style has a high level of responsiveness and a high level of demandingness. Okay, they meet each other. Permissive parenting style has a high level of responsiveness, do whatever you want, but a low level of demandingness. Very, very dangerous. The unengaged or uninvolved parenting style has a low level of demandingness and a low level of responsiveness. The authoritarian parenting style has a high level of demandingness and the low responsiveness. Now, I've already told you all the answer. most people think it's the unengaged, uninvolved parenting style. That one is actually just a neglectful parent. But the worst parenting style is permissive parents. And permissive parents, what we've found in 40 years of permissive parenting research is that those children grow up and they struggle functioning in the world. They seem to be like in an adult's body, but still very prepubescent in terms of their thinking because of the permissive parenting that often leads, like someone said earlier, to substance abuse, drug abuse, impulsiveness. They can't delay gratification, not just as a child, but even as an adult. Just another quote I wanted you all to have. In these times, I think we all need a friend like Beth. So I just wanted to share this with you. Beth stands for belly breaths, emotions, thoughts, and helpful responses. I hope you all can use this in our journey together over the coming weeks and months. The next handout.
A t-shirt, that's for sure.
Right. We're going to get them, Beth. We're going to put your face on the side somewhere. There's another great handout that I've been using for a while, and I love it because I get awesome responses from parents. And I've been leading for a year and a half this parent in trauma training in Marin City with Horizon Community School. So it's a 4-page handout that's only in English. I'm looking at getting it into Spanish that I really want you to take a look at around parents figuring out what their parenting style is. And you can just do a lot with them by helping them figure out their parenting style. Here's a slide, I've already done this, where it talks about the dangers of permissive parenting. This slide looks at the dangers of being a brick wall teacher and what, brick wall teachers, how they show up. Now, when I read this back to myself, I was thinking, you know what? A brick wall teacher is just a mean teacher. That's just a mean teacher. But in terms of overindulgence, brick wall teachers possess low teacher sensitivity around how they are sensitive to children. Listening to me and following my instructions is all that matters. Your perspective as a child is not important. Brick wall teachers create a climate of fear. Learning is about sitting at the desk and getting something from me instead of this, what we know around moving, engaging, and learning. Feedback is perfunctory. That means there's little effort given to them reflecting on what's happening for them and the child or children in their care. There's often threats of calling parents. And then this notion of structural elements take priority over process concerns. So structural concerns in the early learning classroom is like, what curriculum are we using? The number of children, the ratios, these things are important, but they lead the way. Where process interactions around how teachers interact with children, how teachers see time and materials and how they're utilized, how teachers ensure all children experience safety, satisfaction, and connection with support through engagement and stimulation. I just wanted to take a moment to focus on that one because I think this happens a lot and we remain silent about it. Another quote that I like, we learn by teaching. Another great handout for those of you, because I saw lots of family advocates and Head Start and teachers who work with families and clinicians. People just service families in a variety of different ways. So this comes from a training from our friends at Devereaux in Pennsylvania and Villanova. And I found this checklist to be very concrete for families because it looks at 3 areas. It looks at consistency, attuned relationships in the environment, and what parents are doing with their children, just another tool that you may find helpful to use in servicing families. We'll look at another short video. So I think it was Freddie who brought up the notion of alcoholism and drugs. So here we're going to look at affluence and mental illness.
One of the things that I found out when I wrote the book, The Price of Privilege, was that kids from affluent families had particularly high rates of anxiety disorders, depression, psychosomatic disorders, and substance abuse. As a matter of fact, they had the highest rates of any socioeconomic group, which was shocking. The assumption has always been that kids with educated, wealthier parents would do better, not worse. And we had research, which now has been replicated all over the country, saying they're actually doing worse. And the reasons why the rates are so high are twofold. One, there is tremendous academic pressure on these kids. Pressure not to just be good students at something, but to be good students at everything, and actually not just good, to be great. You know, and most of us know that we're good at something, we're not good at everything, and yet these kids feel they have to be great at everything. Leads to perfectionism. Perfectionism leads to depression often. So that's the first reason. The second reason is that they report very high levels of disconnection with their parents, which comes as a shock to parents, because parents are saying, but I'm driving you to soccer and lacrosse and then to your coach and then to your tutor. How can you feel disconnected? But running around like a chicken with your head cut off is really not the same as being connected to your children. And those two reasons account for a great deal of this high rate of mental illness that we're seeing in affluent children.
All right. So before I get to that, I'm going to respond to one question just because it was the last one I saw, or it was a statement around permissive parenting compared to uninvolved, neglectful parenting. So I just want to start off by saying, in my research, there are about 12 research reports that all said similar things around overindulgence. But then there was one researcher who basically said, all these other researchers are wrong. This always happens. Around saying that much hasn't changed around overindulgence in the last 50 years. We've always overindulged children. What we're doing now is we're overindulging them in a different way. That's not what the other research had found, okay? So I just want to put that out there. What they found was that the uninvolved, neglectful parent, that oftentimes leads to what becomes like a DHS case, children being removed from the home, placed in a safer home, which is fundamentally different than a permissive parent who's caring for their child. All my needs are met, all my wants are met. I just have no boundaries and limits, which actually, what the permissive research found was it does damage because it stays with them over time through adolescence and adulthood, which is different than my parent is being neglectful in terms of me being 5 or 7 and what they're not providing me with because they're meeting their own needs and worrying about us second or third, if even thinking about us. So they're fundamentally different around how the parent is responding to their child or children, which is why the uninvolved, neglectful parent oftentimes ends up with a social worker, where the permissive parent typically doesn't end up with a social worker. I hope that makes sense. I'm sorry, I was reading there for a second, Beth. So essentially what she says is our richest populations are doing more drugs, cheating more in school, what the research says, their parents are lying for them, and it stays with them as a value system, unfortunately. This overscheduled nature that children have and their parents, all because of affluence. And affluence has quickly become the new at-risk category because of all the negative effects that it has on the developing brain. So here is what the research says around children of affluence. And there was a whole other research set on children of affluence in treatment, but that would have taken us down a whole nother rabbit hole that I wanted to stay away from. So in terms of children of affluence, have extreme senses of self-assurance, senses of entitlement. They feel easily victimized. Taking your perspective, which is an executive skill, perspective taking is not easy for them. Very low frustration tolerances, lack of appropriate guilt, and planning and coping skills rank very low. So when I did this, I was thinking, woo, this sounds like somebody in our country right now being a child of affluence. There was some research that said not all children of affluence end up here in this hole, that when families actually who are affluent make sure that their children have experiences to give back, to volunteer, those acts as buffers so that these pieces don't take over. However, it was a small percentage, not a large majority. Another resource that I wanted you to have that's in your handout folder, 29 things parents can do to predict school readiness. Because school readiness persists as the language and mediator on the path to K-20 institutions, this list of 29 research-based indicators were derived to support, academic, social, emotional, and of course, intellectual development supported by families and teachers too. So take a look at the handout and hopefully you'll find it useful. And as we're running out of time, I won't do that last activity there, Beth.
Okay.
Here's another resource. It's a 44-page. It's called Good Heart Parenting. So I downloaded it for you and just put the PDF because it's free in the handouts folder. It was created with the ubiquitous cultural messages around overindulging. So there are 14 risky gifts, and I didn't go over that part when I listed the 9. You'll see that risk is there. There are ideas for, countering those risky gifts that we can offer children. You can explore, and for those of you who train parents or work with parents, you can actually use this as a training program if you want, or you can provide it with them, let them take it home. There are multiple ways to use it, but it's really parent and family driven for them to learn about themselves and their child in terms of overindulgence. So you can explore the 9 points about overindulgence by following the progress of the Good Heart and Strong Start families in it. It's a really, I think, a nice guide. Is the handout folder available to us online? Maureen, Leah, you should have received in your email, an email, oh, there it is right there. Leah just put the link there. So there's a Dropbox link right here in the chat box that if you click on, it'll take you to the handouts folder, and everything that I've mentioned regarding the handout is there. And you probably received an email from Leah early this morning with that link that links you to those handouts and resources. All right, we made it, Beth. So
Yes, there were some
now
wonderful questions. So
we're going to come to our third poll, which I really want all of your help in. So Leah's going to put a poll up on the screen. That poll is going to have remaining tender and tough topics. So we want you all to pick what you want the next tender and tough topic to be. There are 10 there, so you're going to need to scroll down to read them all. They're on the screen, but they're actually on the slide poll question also. So what you need to do is pick one, but some people may say, I see 3 I want. So what Beth has asked is that pick one here, and then the other 2, when your evaluation link comes, it might already be in your email already. When your evaluation link comes, put the other ones in the evaluation, and Beth and Leah will synthesize that information.
yeah, one of the things that seems to be very popular is how do you talk to parents about if you have concerns, or if you're curious about a parent, how do you talk to them about their parenting style and how it's working and the impact of it? So maybe that's another training we got to do there. Do some role playing.
Yeah, Beth, I agree. Definitely. So we want to give you all a minute to do that.
Still seeing a lot of activity with the poll, so we'll leave it open a little longer.
Thank you, Brenda. But pick one here, and then you can add the others to the evaluation. What is this? Lilia? So you can pick 2. Pick one on the poll and add the other one to your evaluation.
And we will be hopefully including some of these in our training calendar starting July, the new fiscal year. We're in the process of creating that. So hopefully we'll be contracting with Shawn again to provide some more learning opportunities.
So I keep seeing people who are saying, where's the link? The link is right here in the chat box. And I'm almost confident that Leah sent an email with the link to the handouts also. So you may not be able to check your email right now, but click it here or look at your email.
And I sent it again also.
Thank you, Beth.
Yeah, and when I send the link to the recording for this webinar, I'll include the link to the materials and to other resources for everyone.
Awesome.
Okay, it looks like we're winding down with the poll, so I'm going to go ahead and close it.
Thank you, Leah.
I like maybe that
The
emotional.
one, but Beth, it seems like what you were alluding to got the most votes. Fair families, disruptions, and building relationships got the most votes.
Yeah.
That's what you just talked about. Wow.
Yep.
All right. Thank you
Shawn,
all.
I want to thank you so much for being here, for being a colleague and a person that shares your wisdom with us so generously. We really appreciate it. And I want to thank all of the people who came and participated in our training, and really would love to appreciate you filling out the evaluation and giving us more information about the kinds of trainings that'll be helpful to you.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Please complete the evaluation. Thank you for your time and attention. Continue to stay safe and healthy. Remember, physical distance does not mean social isolation. Please stay connected. We need one another. When you get that link, please complete it. Please complete it. Thank you all who completed. And I want to leave you all with this quote. May the next few months be a period of beautiful transformation. I know that's something I'm holding on to instead of fear and other negative thoughts. I'm seeing the future as a period of beautiful transformation. Thank you all for this time today. We're right on the mark today, Beth. Awesome. I wish you all a great day and a great week. Stay safe and stay healthy. Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.